welcome to the 2022 Texas Tribune Festival. We're happy you're here, and a reminder that good manners and good behavior makes for a good fest for all. These are polarized times, so please be respectful and civil. Even when you see someone or hear something you don't like, enjoy the show.
My name is Anna Marie Cox. I'm a columnist for New York Magazine's The Cut and a writer about politics and various other things. I'd like to welcome you to the festival. To me, this is kind of early, so thank you especially for getting up. On the behalf of the Texas Tribune, I welcome you to the annual festival. This panel will be about 60 minutes. We'll talk for 45 minutes amongst ourselves, and then there's a Q&A period. We don't have microphones for you. Instead, we're going to have you text your questions to, I hope this number is also somewhere else, but I will say it, 512-522-4676. You can do that at any time during our conversation. Oh, and they are going to display it on the screen later. And then we'll kind of collate your questions, and one of the Tribune staff members will come and ask them. Please silence your phones. We welcome live coverage of any kind that you want to do. Twitter, Facebook, whatever. The hashtag is TribFest2022, or TribFest22. And it says from here, please begin your discussion. So, I will do that. Just some brief introductions. This is Alexis McGill-Johnson. She is the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. She has a pin that says "Bands Off Our Bodies," which I like. She is also the co-founder of the Perception Institute, a research group that examines the intersection of brain science, race, gender, and other identities. Donna Howard has represented the 48th District of Texas. Since 2006. Fun fact, she's my representative. Anyone here from South Austin? She might be your representative too. South Austin. She's a former critical care nurse. She's the chair of the Texas Women's Health Caucus, and she serves on the board of the Expanding Horizons Foundation, supporting low-income housing and education. Wendy Davis was a Texas state senator from 2009. Yes. Woo! From 2009 to 2015. She's wearing pink, I'm wearing sneakers. Together, we're a good memento of her famous viral filibuster. She is the founder of Deeds Not Words, which aims to give young women the tools they need to fully participate in policy change. And she is also a horned frog, so go frog. Riff ram. So I asked everyone on the panel before we begin our discussion, which I suspect might not be entirely uplifting, to give something about themselves that maybe isn't in their bio, and then something they're proud of. Because I think it's important to remind ourselves of our accomplishments and our strengths as we go forward into an uncertain future. So, Alexis, do you want to start us off?
Oh my goodness. So when I was in college, I was an aspiring lyricist. I went by the name MC Prim. I was trying to think of a couple bars to spit. All I could come up with this morning so early was like, Graham rhymes with band. So come at me after.
All right, give you time. Maybe in the audience Q&A we'll get someone to...
We'll get some. What I'm most proud of in the last year, well, I'm really proud of the op-ed that I wrote last year around Margaret Sanger, reckoning with Margaret Sanger's history. And important for the organization, obviously, to reckon with her history, but to really name it in a way that set us on the right equity journey, that is long-term work that has to meet this moment in a really meaningful way. And so I'm really proud about how the organization has responded to the crisis by thinking big, moving forward.
Thank you. Donna?
Well, Wendy reminded me of something that I do every year on my birthday, which is I run 10 miles. And I do it just because I've told myself that that's something I'm going to do, and it's empowering to do it. I have a bum toe now, and my birthday's in October, so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make that happen, but I'm still planning to do it. Proud of, I have 3 children. My first baby was a normal-sized baby, 6'14". My last 2, though, were 11 and a half pounds. And I had them in a birthing center without medication, so nothing can bring me down.
So a fun fact, before I found my way into politics, I thought I might try acting. And I was raised in the theater. My dad was a community theater guy, and then he started his own professional theater in Fort Worth called Stage West. And I was in a couple of plays, and it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that that was not really what I was much to my dad's dismay. What I'm proud of is, though I've run some campaigns that have not been successful in terms of the ultimate goal that we hope to achieve, I'm proud of the fact that I've been a part of training up a host of young people who are continuing their life and impact in the political world and working on campaigns in Texas and elsewhere. And it just makes me feel like a proud mother every time I see the work that they're doing now, and that I had the opportunity to play some role in that.
So let's do a quick swerve into the not so fun. So for me, the moment I heard about the Dobbs decision actually coming down created a snapshot memory. Like, I remember exactly what I was doing. I was actually at the end of a Zoom call. Someone had picked up their phone and was like, oh. And I wonder if we could share that now, because I think that it has that kind of power for a lot of us, that it was a moment when everything changed, even though the decision leaked. Like, that moment, there's a before and after. Yeah. So if you don't mind, why don't we start with you, Wendy?
Well, I remember it in the context of just the juxtaposition of a few years prior, 3 years after the filibuster, when the Supreme Court overturned the law that Donna and I had fought so hard against here in Texas. And that moment was such an amazing moment as a lawyer, as someone who has always believed that the Supreme Court is ultimately going to be the balancing entity that's going to save us sometimes from what happens in the political system. I have always had such a great admiration and hope placed in the power of that body. And so to have the Dobbs decision then come down a few years later, and to have this entity that I'd always had so much faith and admiration for undo 50 years of constitutional protections, it was demoralizing in so many ways. And I will never forget just the feeling of having not just the loss of our right to bodily autonomy as women, but also the loss of the grand majesty of the court and what I always believed it represented. And it feels like, at least for now, it's lost. Mm-hmm. And so it's upsetting on so many levels.
Yeah, I mean, I think the immediate visceral response was feeling like, just a gut punch. Even though we knew it was coming, it was stunning to actually hear it. And similar things to what Wendy's talking about were immediately present in my mind as well. And, you know, I came of age before Roe v. Wade. So I knew what it was like before we'd had these constitutional protections. And what we'd been able to achieve over half a century. And to see and think about the fact that so many people that came of age after me had never had to experience not having that protection. It was really stunning, but I think also those of us here in Texas in particular who've been working on this had already been dealing with Senate Bill 8 and already had the preview of what it was going to be like. So it wasn't so much that part of it as it was just the finality of it. Gut punch.
Yeah. Like you asked us to go back to that moment, that visceral moment. Like I can just still feel the tears behind my eyes and trying to hold it together. We were actually in DC, our national boards were meeting. And we, people have come on the board, not met in the last couple of years. It was our first in-person meeting since COVID. And we finished one meeting. We deliberately stopped it at 10 so we could all doom scroll together. And, to everyone's point, it was not surprising, right? Because we knew, we very much anticipated that day would be the day. We, gotten heads up around security, concerns, and it still was shocking to feel that weight. And I remember turning around to, my nearest board member, hugging, sobbing together, and then just running literally to get, to communicate out to the public, our plan to fight. And never really having the opportunity to process, right?
So I think there's a period of grief after that, but also I think maybe simultaneously, I had the thought of like, how is this going to affect me? And how is this going to affect people I love? You have a responsibility for a lot of people, but did you have a specific thought in the aftermath of like, oh no, so-and-so this is going to, someone I love is going to be hurt by this?
I mean, to Donna's point, we were almost a year into SB8. We were 9 months into SB8, and so we had been preparing, right, for what, from a provider perspective, of what that would look like. And I'd spent time. I was here in Austin. I'd been in Houston. I'd been sitting with providers there who were struggling under the weight of that bill and their fear, and talking to patients and their loneliness. I mean, we've seen over the last year, since it has been a year, patients driving 400 miles to get access to care. In some cases, driving to Colorado, having to take a pill at the end of a shift, taking the first medication abortion pill, and then getting in the car and driving back. So all of those logistics, like that's what was coming through my head. Like every tear behind my head, behind my eyes, was a story that I had heard from a provider or a patient or someone on the ground, and the reality that, how quickly the rest of the states would move, and the impact. I mean, Texas has already had a tremendous ripple effect on healthcare and abortion care across the country, and to now magnify that by 16, 17 states, that's what was in my head.
Alexis raises a really important point, which is that Texas has been a preview for this. After SB8 was upheld, abortion was functionally banned in Texas. I wonder, Donna, did you have people coming to you? I mean, I'm sure before that. I mean, abortion has been always unequal access entirely. Do you hear stories from people about this and about what their personal experience is?
Absolutely. I'm going to respond to that from those that are seeking abortion health care and also the providers themselves, because we heard multiple stories about people who were seeking abortion health care but had to wait until it was further along in the pregnancy, complicating what type of procedure might be even available to them in states if they could even get there. And because of all the Texans and from going to other states where it was legal to access abortion, the capacity there was being strained. People were having to wait weeks and weeks. It was displacing people from their state that were seeking abortion health care. And people were in tears, literally in tears, about the obstacles in their way and what they were facing if they could not actually get the procedure. But really what I heard the most from probably were the providers who were so distraught about their inability to use best practices to provide the medical care that they knew was important to provide. The ambiguities and gray areas of the legislation were putting them in a position of having to, as several of the physicians said to me, waiting for women to start dying before they could intervene. And I mean, it was gut-wrenching to hear all of this and to know that anyone who goes into a healthcare provider position is there to render care and to do the best that they can and to use their training and expertise. To have their hands basically tied to provide that was just devastating. And then, of course, we've heard multiple stories then and now about those who have had medical complications or fetal abnormalities with a non-viable fetus, who have been put in horrific situations, not to mention young girls who have been sexually assaulted and being forced as a child to carry a child in a child's body. It's just, the stories are horrible. They're horrible.
Yeah. I feel like I want to follow up a little bit on the horribleness and the practicality of abortion being banned, which is that healthcare providers aren't going to be the only ones providing abortions looking forward. It is true, I think, we are past the coat hanger era, and over 50% of abortions are medical abortions. The procedure, there has been a lot of conversation among activists about getting away from the imagery of the back alley abortion, and that doesn't have to be the way that we think about the future of banned abortions, but we're inevitably looking at self-managed abortions going forward. As a former nurse, like, what do you see unfolding there?
Oh, absolutely. That's a pathway we need to figure out how we can make that work for people, because it is not like when I was a young person. It isn't the coat hanger era anymore. We have safe, effective medications that, if accessed, you can self-manage very safely.
Right.
The problem, of course, is that in Texas, we passed another law, Senate Bill 4, which prohibits the FDA-approved usage of these medications, and furthermore, prevents being able to get these medications through the Postal Service.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. But they've put so many obstacles in place now to where you can't even access safe medication, abortion, which could perhaps result in using some things that are unsafe. Trying to figure out how to make this work is part of our goal right now.
Right.
And certainly we know, we're hearing about the abortions being performed in the Gulf, in international waters, and our good neighbors in Mexico are trying to help out with that as well. But it's so counterintuitive when you have something that's safe to deny access to it and push people into doing something that may be unsafe. But yes, that's the terrain we're in.
I'll just note there is a website called Plan C that, if you live in Texas, it is based in Europe, I believe. You can break the law and order some, just to have on hand if anyone here is interested. Which brings me to a question for Wendy, actually. My thought upon hearing about, actually SB 8, and not just Dobbs. But moving forward, the question for people who believe in abortion access isn't about how do I make change, how do I, those are important questions, but it's how much of a criminal do I want to be?
Yeah.
Because it is technically, I think I'm breaking the law by ordering Plan C and having it on hand. How much of a criminal are you willing to be, Wendy?
I'm a boundary pusher, and I have long believed that when we meet moments like this, it's important for us to push things to their absolute edge and to challenge what's going on. And yes, to challenge it in a way that some may perceive as breaking the law, because we have to force the question forward in a way that helps to wake people up to the reality of this moment that we're in. SB 8 is a great example. When Senate Bill 8 went into effect, which of course was the law that created a bounty system where you could report someone who you believed may have aided or abetted a post-6-week abortion in the state of Texas, truly creating criminals of people who were trying to help people who needed abortions access the health care that they needed. It was my belief from the get-go that we needed some clinics to force that question, to break the law, and to force the hand of the anti-abortionists who were basically able to succeed in stopping abortions just almost completely in our state because they had locked these clinicians, healthcare providers, in a place of such fear that they were afraid to move forward. They were afraid to push that boundary. I started a fund called the Defend the Frontline Fund. We raised about $600,000 for healthcare providers who were on the front line who would be sued if they broke the law. And there was talk for a while that a number of the clinics were going to, quote unquote, hold hands and jump into that abyss and push it. And I just think we need to do that. Donna and I were part of a group of legislators and former legislators who asked the Biden administration to forcefully move forward in saying that the FDA-approved use of medication abortion could be provided via telemedicine from one doctor to patients in the state of Texas who needed that, and that is not violating the law, and to make an executive declaration, basically, that health care can and should be provided. And yes, it's going to be challenged, but force the question and force the answer and show the fight, And I think it's important that people who are in power are the ones pushing the boundaries, not just the patients who need the care, who are in the position of having to fear criminal penalty because they're trying to access care.
I'm really glad you brought up that power disparity because, frankly, it is quite easier for me to get away with being a criminal than someone who doesn't look like me.
That's right.
It's not illegal until you get caught. That's how politicians do it.
This is a good point, but some people are more likely to get caught than others.
Yes. I mean, look, I think there are on a number of levels, right? I think the increased surveillance of SB 8, the impact on these bans, which we know harm, people of color, low-income communities, rural communities,
Disabled
LGBT
people.
communities, disabled people, like way much more. We've seen them on, getting tracked. We've had people in our health center parking lots taking pictures of their tags. The surveillance is real. And my heart is 100% with you, Wendy, around pushing the boundary and figuring out, and Planned Parenthood is part of those conversations, trying to figure out what can we do, knowing that our providers are on the front line, And, you know, the ability to protect them from unknowable risk is also a factor, right? Because we're talking about not just a $10,000 bounty. We were talking about anybody in any state could sue the same person for a $10,000 bounty. And you better believe that they have a system set up to press a button and get all of those lawsuits in aggregated, particularly if, you know, an organization like Planned Parenthood is, you know, running, you know, violating the civil law. And so I think that factors into how we have to think about the fight, that these are also people, you know, who are still paying off their medical loans, they have families, they, like, taking on that risk for them, I think, is also, you know, we have to respect kind of where providers were as well. And so when you think about that sacrifice piece, I also think you have to look at it in the context of the fact that this isn't just about abortion, right? This is about consolidation of power, capturing, you know, entire branches of government, like the, you know, like the courts, and walking into a descent into authoritarianism that we're also up against. And so thinking about what that front line looks like in the context of a tyranny of the minority, that is the longer kind of conversation that we have to have around what are the tools that we need to fight that, because it is abortion now, it is, you know, also voting rights, it is also trans rights, it's also racial justice, it's also, you know, birth control. Like, it will continue to come because they have captured power in a way that is very powerful.
It's the tyranny of the minority and the tyranny of white
That's
supremacy.
right.
Yeah, 100%.
That's right.
100%.
And I wonder if you could speak to what is the place of white women in this fight? Because we are the ones that can get away with breaking the law, you know. And I want to, this is somewhat of a delicate question, because I know for a lot of women who look like me, who are pro-choice, we've, until Dobbs, until SB 8, we were pretty sure we could get an abortion, right? If we really needed it. That's not true for many women who are working class, who struggle with any kind of disability, who are people of color. Those are the people who have already had to do the work of accessing abortion, and there are organizations out there that were already doing the work, right? And then SB 8 and Dobbs came down, and I know for a fact they were flooded with calls from people who look like me saying, what can I do? Do you want to speak to that? Because I know I've heard from people there was a little bit of, well, now you called. Very nice. Calls are great. Money's better. But
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we have to resource the entire abortion ecosystem. It is not just SB 8, right? This has been going on for the last, like, since 2010, even before, you know, the kind of chipping away at the right, the thousands of bans that have been introduced in states across the country, 47 states across the country, that have impacted access over and over again, right? And so, you know, to your point, like our reproductive justice colleagues, women of color, largely black women that have kind of, you know, 25 years ago came up with a construct to help, you know, locate themselves in a fight that was deeply impacting their own liberation. You know, our colleagues would always say, you know, Roe was the floor.
Yeah.
It was the floor. You know, in so many states, we couldn't get access anyway. And so what's a right if you don't have access? And so I think, you know, to speak to the role of white women in particular, you know, I think that there is a lot of leadership. There's a lot of excellent, amazing, extraordinary leadership, and there always has been. I actually interviewed Gloria Steinem yesterday, which was like, oh my God. And she spoke so clearly about, and just fluidly around the role of white supremacy, the role of race, really understanding how these things are intersecting. And I think, if I think of anything of the role, it has to be to educate yourself and understand around how race is operating and getting very comfortable naming that as central to abortion access, because if we can't name our enemy, if we can't name our villains, we cannot actually come up with the strategies that are going to address that. And so when you center the impact of people who are most impacted, center the experience of people who are most impacted, and you center their leadership, it transforms the conversation, the debate, and really helping us, you know, resource that, I think, is critical.
also give money.
Also give money. Money's good.
Also give money. It is, and don't, I'm sorry, personal opinions, like don't do the I'll take you camping or
Yeah.
any kind of that. Like just give money to the people who are providing abortion funds. That's a great way to do something right now. Speaking of doing something right now, we talked about our reactions to Dobbs coming down to SB 8. I was talking to our friends from Supermajority actually last night, or Thursday night, and we were talking about the feelings of women, and particularly women of color, who saw this coming and who were already impacted by it and who've been voting Democratic their entire lives. An astounding statistic that Supermajority came up with is 64% of women in this country feel like politicians don't care about people like them. 64%. The fact the Democratic Party was caught so flat-footed in this, the fact that incrementally it feels like there are so many fights that aren't being won. The Inflation Reduction Act, child care and family leave were cut very early from that. Why should women trust Democratic politicians to take care of them now?
Wow. I think it's valid criticism. I think we certainly took some things for granted. I think we had our eyes opened with what happened in the last election with Georgia and Stacey Abrams and what happened there that, oh yeah, maybe we need to be paying a little more attention here. The thing is, we do have to deal with the injustices and the systemic racism that we have throughout the systems, including throughout our political system. I will speak to the legislature, though, for a moment to say that we've always had these challenges that we've become more and more aware of over the years, and one that's directly related to the issue at hand is our maternal morbidity and mortality. Because our state has one of the highest rates, and it affects black moms 3 times as much as white moms. And we had, up until 2017, an office of, it's been called different things, but it was looking at health disparities and disproportionality. It's become the Office of Minority Health, whatever. It was focused on looking at what are these disparities and disproportionalities so that we can actually address them. And it was defunded in 2017, and we have had legislation since then to try to bring that back. Clearly, we knew from COVID the disproportionate impact on people of color. We've got the maternal morbidity and mortality, and we know the same has been happening with abortion, health care, and access, and also to our undocumented population who have had to go through checkpoints if they want to travel to get health care. It's just, it is this, of course here in Texas we've got this law now, the CRT ban. But I mean, it's just, it's really ridiculous. Yeah. It's right in front of us. The facts are there. And I do think we all have to pay attention to this and see what we can do to move forward. But absolutely, the same thing happened with women getting the right to vote, and we all celebrate that, and we should. But it was mainly white women, and it took us a while to make sure that we brought in our sisters.
But it's so easy to tear down Democrats, right? In a way,
yeah.
I mean, like, it's so easy to say, what like, we got caught flat-footed, or Democrats, nonpartisan, Democrats got caught flat-footed, but the opposition is crazy. You have the AG candidate in Michigan comparing Plan B to fentanyl. You have,
Really?
introducing like right-to-travel laws that you cannot actually leave your state to get access to abortion. That is slavery. Like, they are introducing the most insane things that are about, again, it's easy to say why, but I think it's also when you look at what the choices are, and politics is always about a choice of party, and I think that's our moment now when you see these incredible registrations in women and young people and people of color, like, to remake the party or remake politics as a way, as a vehicle to get government to actually do what you want it to do.
I agree with a lot of that. It's just, I think there is so much frustration about, again, why trust now? There might not be anything specifically that can be done. That's actually the frustrating part, is what can politicians say? No, this time we really will have your back, and this time we mean it. And it's not that you, yes, of course you do. And also there are no alternatives, so this is how we're going to have to vote.
Can I speak to that?
I would like you to, because I didn't know where I was going to go with that. I was just feeling frustrated myself.
The thing that I find frustrating, having lived in this state for most of my life and watched the systematic way in which Republicans seized power and then created a system that allowed them to hold power in a way that is not at all reflective of the majority of people who live in this state. And it's frustrating to me. Democrats haven't had power here, and Democrats have been fighting like hell here. I mean, Donna's been in the legislature since 2006, and if you watch the legislature at all, what you know is that Donna Howard shows up every legislative session and fights like hell. And we have so many great Democrats who are doing that, but the system is stacked against the ability for Democrats to ever be able to break into the majority and actually be reflective of the values of the majority of people who live in this state. And the root of that evil is voting rights. Yeah. The root of that evil is gerrymandering, and the fact that we've had so many districts drawn so that Republicans are absolutely guaranteed the win no matter what. And they have become these extreme crazy people because they are rewarded in their primaries, which is the only game in town for so many of them. They don't have to worry about the general election. The crazier you are, the greater the reward in Republican electoral politics today. And they become the people who are making laws that are impacting the rest of us. And you said it a minute ago, it is the tyranny of the minority. It truly is. And it's not a failure of the Democratic Party unless maybe you say, I wish we had a magic time machine and we could go back to President Obama's first 2 years in office when he had a majority Senate and a majority Democratic House, and if only the John Lewis Voting Rights Act could have been passed way back then, and we could have had a correction to what has brought us to the place that we are today. That was probably our one big failure, is that we didn't see how dangerous our failure to protect voting rights was actually going to be. And Texas is living the impact of that, and Texans are living the impact of that. And y'all are probably asked this too. I know you're a Texan and Austinite, Anna Marie. Why do you live in Texas? Why don't you leave? And it's because this is who we are. We are not abnormalities. We're not the exception. We are the rule in this state in terms of what we think and what our values are. And we aren't allowed to reflect those values legislatively because of the system that was created so that we can't. And then the final thing I want to say about this is, hello, white women.
Yes.
Will you please stop voting for Republicans? Please. 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 God.
I have so many thoughts. One of them, and maybe we'll just get to this in a second, but if it is not a failure of the Democratic Party, maybe it's a failure of politics.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that's a better way to say it.
And I was just going to say, too, you know, I think we did take certain things for granted, like you mentioned, Wendy, that we would be protected by the courts.
Yeah.
Yes.
That we had a Constitution and a Supreme Court that we could count on. And I think part of the disillusionment, too, is that we tell voters just about every election cycle, this is a very important election.
Yep.
You need to get out and vote. And they are all important. And you do need to get out and vote. And I always say, every vote counts. In the 2010 election, when the Tea Party took over here, And we went from 74 Democrats in the House to 49. I won only ultimately by 4 votes out of over 50,000. Every vote counts and every vote is important. But what we never really conveyed appropriately, I don't know that any of us really understood it, how important that race was when Trump won and how he was there to make sure he made those Supreme Court appointments. That was what made the difference.
Yeah.
And that's why we are where we are now. Looking back again, like you said, Wendy, if we could go back in time and change some things. But I understand where people are coming from, but some of it was, I think, we were all kind of
Right.
blown away by the fact that the Supreme Court turned its back on us.
But I do think, and we should take responsibility and do our own autopsy on this moment and on each election. Like, I think we could go back and look at 2008 and to 10, because 10 is actually when obviously the census and the gerrymandering, and the Tea Party all intersected, transforming all of these state houses. But it is if there is any surprise or any lesson from the opposition, it is how they are willing to destroy democratic institutions in the name of power. That is a difference. That is something that we have to be prepared to fight differently. And so when you see the Senate Majority Leader weaponizing rules changes, right, and at whim, right, I'm going to hold Merrick Garland's seat, and then I'm going to rush Amy Coney Barrett through. I'm going to do, because it doesn't matter. It's about, we have to think about elections as moments and movements. And they had a movement around building power and consolidating it so they could do whatever the hell they wanted to do.
What I was just thinking is, I do a failure of politics and a failure of the Democratic Party, and it's a failure of politics in a way because these extremists on the GOP were willing to go outside normal politics.
That's right.
Absolutely.
They were willing to break the rules of politics,
That's right.
change what politics was. I also wanted to say, just to make it very clear, voting rights is a reproductive justice right.
Yes.
It's not the other way around. It's not that you
That's right.
vote in order to get your reproductive justice. We have to think of them as the same thing.
That's right.
So in Texas, it may be the solution, the way to start to create a movement to get back these rights, which I think we have to believe is possible, right? Does it begin outside politics? What would that might look like? Are there things we can learn from the Tea Party? We don't want to destroy the democratic institutions, which is what they were willing to do. But is there anything that in Texas can start somewhere else, can borrow some of those ideas? Do you see anything?
Well, the first thing I would say to that is, within the confines of the political system, in statewide races, gerrymandering does not count. It does not matter. Every vote is equal, and we have an opportunity in a statewide race to finally break apart the system of injustice that has existed in Texas since 1994, when Ann Richards lost her second race. We have an opportunity to break apart what's been happening here this year. If we will show up and vote for Beto O'Rourke and Mike Collier and Rochelle Garza and all the way down, we have an opportunity to show what Democrats can do if they are in power. So within the political system, we can do that. The one thing that I thought the Tea Party did exceptionally well way back in the passage of Obamacare early on was they showed up and they demonstrated their upset. And they did it in a way that really put elected officials on the defense. And that's what we have to do in this moment, is to continue, not to consign ourselves to the idea that this is our new reality and now we're going to go figure out how to get that care, which of course is so important, but never, never, never to accept this is our reality, and to continue to show up in force, in their face, at every opportunity that we can, and make them understand the lived experiences of the reality that they have now created for people across this state and across the country.
I want to get to questions, but before we do you have anything to add to that point either, Alexis or
I'm totally on board with what Wendy was saying about the statewide elected officials, because we're not going to be able to change what's going to happen overall with the legislature. But if you elect a governor like Beto, then he would have the power of the veto. Lieutenant Governor, if it's Mike Collier, would have the power of the agenda and the gatekeeper. And if you elect Rochelle Garza, Attorney General, she would have the power about interpreting law. Those three things would happen right now.
Yeah. What I would add to that is, I think that is a playbook for many of these states, right, where we're seeing these bans that are, incredibly out of sync with where their constituents are. I think it's both about identifying those opportunities and then also direct democracy, right? I mean, Kansas was, quite amazing, right? The fact that people showed out, Michigan, Kentucky. I think there are places where direct democracy is also a way to counter gerrymandering. It's expensive, it is labor intensive, but it is motivating as hell, and you see people moving in that direction. And I think there's a long-term view, right? Again, like from a movement perspective, we have to be, we had been hanging on to Roe, if we're honest, right, by our fingernails by the time we got to the Dobbs decision. And in some ways, we need to liberate ourselves from defending Roe, right? Because it was never grounded in equality. It's never grounded in freedom. So how do we reimagine and how do we reconstruct in this moment? So we are also bringing people into something that they know they are fighting for that will protect them in that way. And I think we also miss that motivating factor of what it would mean to be able to have access to abortion.
I wonder if one thing that activists might learn from the Tea Party movement in terms of direct democracy, in terms of making themselves heard, is being unafraid to say things that weren't said before. I mean, the extremists of the Tea Party were I don't want to get into their racism and Nazi sympathies and whatnot, but what about just reclaiming, I want to be able to get abortion whenever I want? It used to be apologetic. What do you think about making it much more forward, much less something that we like, yes, it would be nice if everyone could get an abortion?
Oh, I want to be able to control my body. I want to be able to make decisions. I want to be able to, have people recognize that I trust myself to make these decisions. I want it to be funded in the budget, right? I want it to be part of healthcare because that's exactly where it should be located. I think we should be naming all of those things. I think we should be naming the racism that has not only connected, again, the dots between abortion rights, but voting rights and CR rights and fighting CRT and all of these other things. I think that we need to name that for some people, the Civil War may not have ended. Yeah. And when I think about the fact that this country, this isn't the first time a right has been taken away, right? Like I go back to Reconstruction, when the federal troops pulled out, that was essentially losing a right.
If we could really go back in time,
by the way,
I think that would be a good point.
Yeah, that might be, if we're in that motor machine, that time machine, that would actually be a great place to start, because I think that we have to also take lessons, not just from the Tea Party, but for struggles for justice and struggles for freedom, right, that don't have the luxury of staying in despair, that don't have the luxury of not fighting, right? I mean, of believing that freedom will come. And so I think that is the lesson that we have to actually hold to.
All right, we'll get to questions now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Darla Cameron. I'm an editor at the Texas Tribune. The audience asks, as you've noted, this summer's vote in Kansas highlighted the divide between legislators and the will of the people. What are the paths to change the law in Texas?
So Texas, conveniently, obviously very strategically, we don't have the opportunity for statewide ballot initiatives. The only way you can make a constitutional change in Texas is for 2/3 of the House and the Senate to agree that an issue should be put before the voters. And so we can't have statewide citizen initiatives that can create referendums on issues of importance like this. But what we can do is we can have local initiatives. For example, here in Austin, this is one of the first cities that passed a paid sick leave ordinance, and then other cities followed suit. There are efforts underway to do this for the decriminalization of marijuana. And there are also now efforts underway. Ground Game Texas is a great organization doing work on these things, underway to decriminalize access to abortion care, instructing police forces and district attorneys in cities across the state not to prosecute these quote-unquote crimes that the legislature has defined. And so there are ways, bit by bit by bit, that we as citizens can fight and try to take control, and again, push this question into the court system, which is exactly where it will ultimately be headed, in a way that continues to push and push and push until we get the kind of change that we want to see.
Thanks. Women are not getting pregnant on their own. What strategies? What strategies could we pursue?
If they were, that would be news. I'm sorry. Yeah.
What strategies could we pursue to put more pressure on men to make them understand what bodily autonomy means?
I'll tell you that is, we have a lot of discussion about that right now in my office and with a lot of the advocacy groups to try to figure out how do we move forward to address that without having some unintended consequences. One of which is personhood of the fetus. And there is concern about how we would make the sperm donor more responsible for the 50% of the contribution that that person made to the pregnancy in a way that doesn't take away the autonomy and rights of the person who got pregnant. So we're working with some family law people to figure out what the law currently says and how can we do things that won't create more problems for the person being forced to carry a pregnancy, but at the same time have some responsibility for the sperm donor. Again, we're in the midst of working on this. I hear this from people all the time because I think we all recognize the biology here and the fact that the sperm donor contributes, 50% of what's happened here, but oftentimes 0% of the consequences. So it's a tricky thing, and the personhood is also a tricky thing because once you get into, and I'm not a lawyer, but once you get into the legal aspects of considering the fetus a person, then you're having to look at things like, well, then what happens with in vitro fertilization? Because that's a person. Mm-hmm. What happens if you take a medication abortion out of state and then come back and you are taking your second pill here? Oh, some are saying then that would be human trafficking. This is how bizarre and how extreme. You said the crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're going to all kinds of extremes. So I appreciate the question, and I want you to know that we're definitely looking at that. We want to make sure that we do it in a way, though, that is going to be helpful and not create more problems.
I have a follow-up for Alexis, because we touched on this before we came on stage, which is that the question brought up the gendered language of who gets pregnant. And there's been some activists feel pretty strongly, although it's not the top issue, that we start to de-gender the idea. There are people who get pregnant, and not necessarily, while abortion, you can say it is a women's issue. It is also a human issue. What do you feel about that language change?
I think that it is important to use language that is inclusive, right? That all of the people who can get pregnant, right? So women can get pregnant, so can trans men, so can non-binary people, so can, and so like ensuring that we are actually naming. My preference is to actually name who we're talking about, not just say pregnant people, but actually name so people feel seen and feel included in the conversation, having a stake in that. I think it is important to, not everyone identifies as a woman.
Right.
And so we should be really clear about that and use our pronouns
And I wonder if we talk about it more as like people who get pregnant, that some men might hear it. Like, there's this, if we just talk about abortion as a human rights issue. While women have borne the brunt of all of the laws, it seems like we need to expand the idea of who gets affected by it. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, follow up.
Great. How do you get people to understand that abortion care includes what is often thought of as miscarriages and saves women's lives?
Well, let me just say, abortion is a medical term for terminating a pregnancy, whatever the reason is. Talking about how we frame things and how we push the boundaries on the language and how we talk about things in our stories. The destigmatization of that word is one place we need to start. We have, in Texas, we actually have in our statute that termination of an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion, even though medically it is. And we did that because one of my colleagues had a campaign where somebody put out literature that his wife had had an abortion, and he was very pro-life. And indeed, she'd had a termination for an ectopic pregnancy. So medically, yes, she'd had an abortion, but he was so offended by this that he made sure we got that wording in there. But this is, again, some of the things we're going to have to come back and fix, because part of the problem that the physicians are telling us they have is that because of the wording we put in the statute, it's not totally inclusive of all forms of ectopic pregnancies. So we're going to have to go back and clarify language there, because we did not fully explain what we meant when we said ectopic pregnancies. But clearly it is impacting people who are miscarrying and have to have a termination. But as I said earlier, they're being put into a position where they have to actually go into sepsis or come back after they've bled a whole lot.
Right? They have to have an abortion.
They have to have an abortion.
We should all use the word abortion
Yes.
like more, right?
Yeah.
I think that it is really important to have, to understand how stigma operates, right? It operates very individually, very silently. It is a tool to subjugate. It's a tool to intimidate. It's a tool to terrify. And so, some of our power has been to tell our stories, right? To be able to engage and make sure that people understand, like, Chrissy Teigen saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, I thought I had a miscarriage, but actually I had an abortion. That's a big deal for someone to be able to make the connection and recognize the fact, because if you're embarrassed because you had an abortion, but you can tell a story about a miscarriage, then you're reinforcing that stigma. And the way in which these policies are they're essentially codifying the stigma and the inequality because we have this cultural stigma. And so I think it's so important to be able to, also raise the question, right? How is it that many of these laws are going to be enforced, right? Are you going to investigate every miscarriage? What is that going to look like?
That's right.
This follow-up, which is that none of us have actually, or I think only Donna used, because you had the term pro-life to describe the opposition to reproductive choice. I have a preferred term to describe those people. I don't think they could be called pro-life.
No.
What should we say? Because words are so important. What is that opposition? What is the name for that opposition?
Misogynistic assholes.
I can't top that.
Yeah.
All right. The State Health Agency announced that maternal mortality data will be delayed until after session. What can the legislature do to uncover what's happening?
This is just so egregious. I'm sorry? Link the doc.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. There's a lot of journalists who are doing the Freedom of Information request to try to get information. We also, though, are working as much as we can behind the scenes to try to get information that will determine how this even happened in the first place and where that came from, but also get the draft that we know is out there and determine why this even happened in the first place. So once we can get our hands on that, we can see, is it what we suspect? That perhaps because now that women have had less access to abortion, they're actually dying more. Is that what we're going to see here? Well, I don't know, because they won't let us see it. But we are doing everything we can to get that information, and we'll make sure that we get that out so that people will know what the data shows. The legislature will have the information they need to be able to take action in the next legislative session.
Can we try to sneak one more question in?
Sneak one more in? Okay. What is ahead in the upcoming legislative session? Could there be more tweaking of current law to loosen restrictions, or will there be a doubling down?
Okay.
I didn't want to end on a downer, but
You know, just yesterday I was at the trib session with the Speaker of the House, who was asked about whether or not he would be supportive of exceptions. And he indicated that his answer was that he and his constituents were happy with the law the way it was now. I will say, though, that there are a lot of people out there in the general public that identify as Republican who are saying that they want to see exceptions for rape or incest. They want to see some exceptions for fetal abnormalities. We are going to be pushing legislation to do that sort of thing. So clearly that's going to happen. We're going to try to do what we can to make sure we have access to contraceptives, because there's also potential for some legislation to prevent access to contraceptives and to Plan B, even though Abbott has said that's what we're supposed to use. But anyway, so there's a whole lot of things that we're going to have to be doing this session. A lot of them are going to be defense, as we usually have to do. But we are going to be pushing to try to get more funding for women's health care, because if you say you're pro-life or whatever the word is that you come up with to describe those folks, put your money where your mouth is here and make sure that we're supporting women who are currently carrying pregnancies, but the additional women we're going to have carrying pregnancies, because they're going to be forced to carry pregnancies because they won't have options, because we don't have reproductive justice. They won't be able to go to another state. And right now, more than half of the births are Medicaid births, and the people who have the least resources are going to be the least likely to be able to get out of state, to get an abortion. So we're going to increase the number of people who need these services, and we're now funding 20% maybe of eligible people. So we have a lot to do there. Let's get funding there, and let's make sure that we do something about alternatives to abortion. If we're going to have that, then it needs to be regulated. It needs to be providing medical services and not just sending pamphlets out and scaring people away from having the choice that they did have and helping them get the access to the kind of health care they need. So there's a lot.
before we wrap up, I would wonder, what do you want to end on? What note do we want to end on here? We're going to be playing defense, is true, but maybe there's something else we can say.
I would say we have a moment, we have an opportunity to seize power. We have an opportunity to seize power, and holding power is essential to making our way out of this situation. Let's do that. Let's do everything we can. There's only like 43 days left or something until the election. Let's do everything we can to seize power and to hold it in a way that is reflective of the values of the people of this state.
Thank you very much. I think that's the best. I think that's great, actually. Seize power.
Yeah.
And thank you all for being our wonderful audience.